We live in a time where answers are everywhere. You feel confused about love, you open your phone. You feel heartbroken, you search for advice. And within seconds, you find thousands of voices telling you what to do, how to act, what to say. But here's the problem. The more you listen, the more confused you become. Because not all advice is wrong, but not all advice is right for you. Love is not a formula. It's not a script you can memorize. It's not a set of rules you can follow step by step. And yet, we treat it like a checklist. Text this, don't say that. Wait 3 days, don't act uninterested. But love was never meant to be a strategy. The truth is, every relationship is unique. Different people, different emotions, different timing. And when you try to force generic advice onto a personal experience, you lose something important. You lose authenticity. You stop listening to your own instincts. Instead of asking, what do I feel? You start asking, what would others do? And slowly, you disconnect from yourself. This is where the real damage begins. Because love requires presence. It requires honesty. It requires courage, not perfection. You don't need to say the perfect thing. You don't need to follow the perfect rule. You need to be real. Yes, learning is important. Yes, guidance can help. But too much advice becomes noise. And noise drowns your inner voice. So instead of consuming endlessly, pause. Instead of searching for answers, reflect. Ask yourself, what do I truly feel? What do I truly want? What kind of connection am I building? Because at the end of the day, no video, no post, no advice can understand your heart better than you can. Love is not something you master by watching others. It's something you understand by experiencing it, by making mistakes, by learning, by growing. So don't let the world overcomplicate something that is meant to be human. Trust yourself a little more, because the strongest relationships are not built on perfect advice, they are built on real connection. Overconsumption of advice creates confusion. At first it feels helpful. You watch one video, and it makes sense. Then another, and it sounds even better. And then another, offering a completely different perspective. Suddenly you're not learning anymore, you're comparing. One voice tells you to be patient. Another tells you to walk away. One says express your feelings. Another says stay silent and mysterious. And now you're stuck in between. Because every piece of advice sounds right when you hear it in isolation. But when you hear too many voices at once, clarity disappears. Your mind starts to overanalyze. Simple situations feel complicated. Small decisions feel heavy. You begin to question everything. What should I say? Am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? And instead of acting naturally, you hesitate. Instead of feeling your emotions, you filter them. Because now, it's not just about what you feel, it's about what you've heard. And the more advice you consume, the louder the noise becomes, until your own voice becomes the quietest one in the room. You forget what you actually think. You forget what you actually want. And in trying to do everything right, you lose your sense of what feels right. Because confusion doesn't come from lack of answers. It comes from too many answers pulling you in different directions. Generic advice doesn't fit personal reality. It often sounds convincing, clear, structured, confident. Do this. Avoid that. Always behave this way. And for a moment it feels like you've found certainty. But the problem is, that advice wasn't created for you. It wasn't built around your personality, your experiences, your fears, your values. It was made for a general audience, a wide range of people living completely different lives, different emotional histories, different communication styles, different expectations from love. And yet, you try to take that broad advice, apply it to a very specific situation. Your situation, a connection that has its own rhythm, its own context, its own unspoken understanding. What works for one person might feel unnatural for you. What seems attractive in one relationship might feel distant in another. Because people don't respond to formulas, they respond to authenticity. But when you follow generic advice, you start adjusting yourself. You begin to act in ways that don't fully align with who you are. Maybe you hold back when you want to express. Maybe you act distant when you want to be present. Maybe you pretend not to care when you actually do. And slowly, you move further away from your natural self. Not because you're wrong, but because the advice doesn't match your reality. It doesn't account for your emotions in that exact moment. It doesn't understand the dynamic you share with someone. It doesn't see the details that only you can feel. So instead of bringing clarity, it creates internal conflict. You feel torn between what feels true to you and what you've been told is right. And in that tension, your actions lose their meaning. Because when you try to fit yourself into someone else's framework, you stop responding to life as it is and start reacting to an idea of how it should be. Dependence on external validation. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins subtly. You hear a piece of advice and you check if it applies to you. Then you hear another and you start measuring your actions against it. At first it feels like guidance, but over time something shifts. You stop asking yourself what feels right, and you start asking what looks right to others. Before making a decision, you pause, not to reflect but to compare. What would people say about this? Is this the correct move? Am I doing it the right way? And without realizing it, your confidence begins to depend on approval. Approval from voices that don't know your full story. Approval from opinions that aren't living your reality. You begin to second-guess your instincts. Even when something feels clear inside, you hesitate because it hasn't been confirmed from the outside. So you keep searching. More videos, more opinions, more reassurance. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you've slowly trained yourself to trust others more than yourself. And the more you rely on that validation, the weaker your inner certainty becomes. Simple choices start to feel overwhelming. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze every word you said. You wonder if you came across the right way. Because now it's not just about connection, it's about evaluation. You're no longer fully present in what you feel. You're observing yourself through the imagined judgment of others. And that creates distance. Distance between you and your emotions. Distance between you and your decisions. Because every action now carries the weight of being judged. So instead of moving naturally, you move carefully. Instead of expressing freely, you filter constantly. And slowly, your sense of self becomes dependent on something outside of you. Not built from within, but shaped by reaction. And in that process, you don't just lose confidence, you lose the ability to stand firmly in your own perspective. Emotional detachment versus real connection. Somewhere along the way, love started to sound like a strategy. You hear things like, don't get too attached, stay in control, care less to win more. And it sounds logical. It sounds protective. Because no one wants to get hurt. So you start building distance. Not physically, but emotionally. You hold back your thoughts. You filter your feelings. You measure your responses. Not based on what you genuinely feel, but based on what seems safe, what seems effective. And slowly you begin to replace connection with calculation. Instead of listening deeply, you analyze. Instead of expressing honestly, you adjust. Moments that should feel natural start to feel rehearsed. Conversations become controlled. Reactions become measured. Because now, you're not just you're performing, trying to maintain an image, trying to avoid vulnerability, trying to stay one step ahead. But real connection doesn't grow in control. It grows in openness, in the willingness to be seen without filters, without strategies. Because connection is not built on perfection. It's built on truth, on imperfect words, on genuine reactions, on moments where you don't have everything figured out. But when you prioritize detachment, you protect yourself, yet at the same time, you limit the depth of what you can experience. You might avoid discomfort, but you also avoid closeness. You might feel in control, but you also feel distant. Because walls don't just keep pain out, they keep connection out too. And the more you rely on those walls, the harder it becomes to let anyone in, to be fully present, to be emotionally available. Because connection requires risk. Not reckless risk, but emotional honesty. The kind that can't be optimized. The kind that can't be scripted. It requires you to show up as you are, not as a version of yourself designed to avoid getting hurt. Self-awareness is the real solution. Not more advice. Not more strategies. Not more rules to memorize. Because no matter how much you consume, it will never replace the clarity that comes from understanding yourself. Self-awareness begins quietly. It starts when you stop looking outward for constant answers and begin looking inward with honesty. Not surface-level questions, but deeper ones. Why do I feel this way? What am I actually afraid of? What am I trying to protect? And sometimes the answers are uncomfortable. You may realize that it's not about the other person, it's about your own patterns, your own expectations, your own fears of rejection, your own need for control or reassurance. Things that no general advice can fully see or explain. Because those details are personal. They belong to your experiences, your past, your emotional wiring. And until you understand those parts, you'll keep searching for solutions in the wrong places. You'll try to fix situations externally that are rooted internally. But when you become aware, truly aware, something shifts. You start recognizing your triggers instead of reacting to them. You notice your habits instead of being controlled by them. You begin to understand why certain situations affect you more than others. And that awareness creates space between feeling and reaction, space to choose how you respond. Instead of acting out of fear, you act with intention. Instead of repeating patterns, you question them. Because now, you're not just experiencing emotions, you're understanding them. And that changes everything. It gives you clarity without needing constant input. It builds confidence without needing approval. It allows you to show up in a way that aligns with who you are, not who you think you should be. Because real growth doesn't come from collecting answers. It comes from asking the right questions about yourself.